are so glad to be here today with our sweet Dwonne Cogswell. And as we've done before, with these unique times that we're going through, um, kind of like Paul did with the churches and their unique times and shared some encouragement and writing to them, we just wanted to hear what's on your hearts today for not just our Westart family, but also for just the church at large. What's on your heart today? A word of encouragement.
Well, thanks, Dina. One of the things that just really, really strikes with this is we're just not very far removed from one another. And you being a connections minister, you know, you're even more aware of that than most of us are, but it's kind of like a big wake up. I mean, we've seen a lot of things that have told us that, and yet we sometimes just kind of just run on by them. But this time we're seeing something that is not just going on here, it's going on across the world. And normally when something's happened like a war or something like that, there's certain places that are being bombed, there's certain things that are going on, and the rest of us are kind of outside of that. But this one, we can see the streets in France, and we can see the streets in another country, and we can go, that's our street, you know, that's us in the mass, that's us standing in lines. And just the commonality and just the, you know, we're just all one humankind, and it just really strikes us afresh. And how that it is not very far removed. It doesn't take very long for this one thing that happens over here to ripple across and move into a large, large amount of space and across the country and across the world. And if it can ripple in that way with something negative, then it's like, okay, the same kind of ripples can happen in good things too. And so that's one thing we want to remember as well. But we are not that far removed from one another. And that was one of the first things that just really, really struck. The second thing, and Brian and Shelley referred to some of that, was about the creativity. You know, here we are, and sometimes in more restricted conditions. And so it brings out some of that creative juices that we have in us. And it's like, what can we do with this? And, you know, and she talked about some of the things that people were doing to connect with other people. But then I look at what's happening with our services and what's happening with things like this. And people that have certain skills and talents are coming up, and they're taking on a role that maybe wasn't there or they didn't see a need for before, and they're stepping into that. And so that's great to see that. And also we see people offering their talents, whether it's sewing or whether it's, you know, video recording or whatever it is. We see them, how can I use what I can do and do something with that? And so it's just really a lovely thing to see. And then when we do see the services, one of the things to me, it's kind of like a poem or anything that draws a frame around something. You know, we're kind of focusing on, like at this point, we're focusing on the person preaching and what they're doing with that. And then we're focusing on a certain prayer, and we see one brother or sister in front of us, and it's like, you know, I think that attention to the one thing at a time, without some of the distractions, has been just setting a frame around it and making us really think about the different kinds of contributions that people make. And so, and just how much you appreciate that. And I think we see that also with the different kinds of workers that work sometimes behind the scenes. They're always there, but we sometimes now we're having a little frame around them, and it's like, you know, we're really paying attention. And so that's a good thing for us, because we sometimes don't. So I like that. One of the things that I was thinking about is, remind me of C.S. Lewis, and what would Screwtape want to say to his nephew Wormwood about to cause us trouble in the kingdom, so under a pandemic. And so I looked around on Google, I Googled it, and in Christianity Today about a month ago had an article about that. And it's like, all right, so if we find out what he says, we want to do the opposite of that, right? So what did that suggest? So the first thing that he tells Wormwood, that was in this particular article, was, we want to nurture interpersonal hostility. Okay, let's get upset with each other about the things, let's be threatened by each other, who's got the most toilet paper, who's holding up the line. We want to point to others and say what idiots they are. And we've seen that, right? We've seen some of that. That's what the world says. And so what then would we do instead of that? What we would do is, instead of fragmenting, we would want to pull together. We would want to see, how can I be compassionate here? How can I try to be understanding to the person who is frustrated here, who may have fears, who may be scared, who may feel threatened? You know, how can we, instead of responding in the worldly way, how can we then be the salt and light that we're called to be? And the great opportunity that he gives us then to say, this is the difference between people in the kingdom and the people outside the kingdom. This is how it looks. And so we get a chance to glorify God in that. And it's an extraordinary time for us to be able to be that salt and light, if we will, if we'll do that. So we want to encourage good relationships. We want to help each other to be peaceable and to be compassionate for one another, even when we may be irritable, even when we may feel threatened. And the second would be, okay, I want you to avoid, this is again Screwtape, I want you to avoid enjoying simple pleasures and beauties, right? We want you to be distracted all of this stuff. So don't look around and see the good stuff here. I want you to stay in your anxiety. And we see people posting pictures of their flowers and of their walks and going outside and looking up at the stars, and all that, of course, reminds us of the goodness and the faithfulness of God and how awesome he is. And it reminds us that he's in control. And if he's in control of these big things that we see and the tiniest little things that we see, then we can trust that he's going to take care of us too, just like he tells us he will. And so go ahead and be out there and look around and pay attention to the things that God does and his faithfulness and his goodness, and rejoice in that and give him praise for that, and be humble. Then the third thing was, don't look at your own limitations and don't look at your own mortality. Just brush all that aside, right? Because those are the things that would humble us and remind us of who God is and who we're not. And there's a lot of things that we don't have control of. And so we don't need to be anxious about that because we have no control of it in the first place. And so it reminds us to be humble, and it reminds us to that our life is all coming from him. And yes, we are limited, but we have a Father who is not, and we have a Savior who is for us, and he is mighty, and he is always there, and we're never alone. And so we know that our trust is to be in him. And so it's okay for us to be limited. It's okay for us not to have control, because we don't have to have that, because we have a Father like we do. So go against Screwtape's advice, do the opposite. And I'm sure there'd be other things about him that would be included in there that would help us just turn it around, see the opposite of that. So those were the main thoughts that I had. The other thing is, if we remember when we were a child and we're anxious, how comforting it was when mom or dad would walk in the room and they tell us that everything's going to be all right. We don't know what's going to happen, right? But we know it's all going to be okay. And one of the things that we can offer each other is that comfort when we know within ourselves, and we are peaceable within ourselves and grounded and centered, because we know who God is and we know who is in control, and we don't have to have that control. We don't need that control, and we can rest and just trusting him, that we can radiate that to the people around us. And especially if you have children, if they see you're okay, that's going to, then if you're okay, mom and dad's okay, then I'm going to be okay, that I'm all right, because I trust in them. And if they're all right, then I do. And I mean, even when I had the baby blues after having Breck, my mom came in the room where I was kind of a little antsy, and she said, and she just smiled in that very loving and knowing way, and in words of comfort said, it's going to be all right. And I believed her. Mm-hmm. And we can be that way, and we can spread that peaceableness and groundedness because we're centered in who he is. Let that come on through, that be that vessel. I think we've also seen that we know that the Lord goes before us. And we've seen that in our church body here, in the setup of the online services. So people had some particular camera equipment that they just recently purchased and learned how to use, and all those things have started. We've gone through the learning process of that, the basic part beforehand, and it's like, God is so good. And we're like, this is amazing to look back and go, oh, that was already set up beforehand. That was set up beforehand. And we had no idea where that might be leading. And yet look at what he's done with that. And it's just amazing. We ought to be awed, and we ought to be rejoicing, and we ought to be saying, just how wonderful he is, and let that just emanate from us, because we're surrounded by that. He is so good and faithful. So I do have a couple of verses if you want me to share those.
No, Dwonne, please don't share it. Please.
Okay. They're very short ones, actually, because short ones we can remember really easily or whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah. If I still have it turned to the right page over here. One of them is, nope, I flipped the page on that one. One of them is Isaiah 41:13. It says, "For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you." Mm-hmm. I mean, the images of that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And the other is John 17:33. Back over to that. Another short one. Oops, I think I wrote that down wrong. Oh, 16:33. "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world."
Absolutely.
Those will make your heart smile.
Absolutely. Well, all of what you have said has made my heart smile, and I'm just so great. So every time I talk to you, this happens. There's just so much to take in and to process, and I'm so grateful for that, though. And I'm so grateful to be able to share it with others now, because this is what our conversations are like all the time. But I'm grateful to have a format to share it with others. And so much good. I'm hearing ripples of good. Let's just enjoy, and let's share the creativity and the simplicity of this time that we have. And let's certainly I'm just trying to share what my simple brain is processing right now, but let's certainly enjoy the goodness and the faithfulness of our Father. There's so much more that you shared, but those are the ones that my brain is processing right now. And I'm just so grateful for you and Dave and all that you do for our church family. And thank you
to you on that one.
Well, thank you for spending this time with me today too, and for sharing your thoughts and these scriptures especially. And just blessings for the rest of this time until we can meet again, as we sang this morning. And we just love you, and we thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.